Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's lecture at the Center for Global Security Research. My name is Asmaret Askedom. I'm the Associate Deputy Director of the Center, and I'll be your host today. It's my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker, Ann Neuberger. Ann's lecture is titled U.S., China, Deterrence, and Digital Twins. Ann is a U.S. national security official who served as the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology in the Biden administration. Prior to that role, she served for over a decade at the NSA as Director of Cybersecurity and as Assistant Deputy Director of Operations, and as the agency's first Chief Risk Officer. Ann's talk today is based on her article recently published in Foreign Affairs in August titled, China is Winning the Cyber War and America Needs a New Strategy of Deterrence. She will explain to us the access that China has gained into U.S. critical infrastructure and how the U.S. can step up its deterrence. In terms of the format, the speaker will take about 30 to 45 minutes to give her presentation, and then we'll transition to the Q&A session for the remaining 45 minutes. There are two ways to ask a question. You can either raise your hand electronically on WebEx, or you can type your questions into the chat. Please get your questions and comments ready while Ann is speaking so we can just jump right into the Q&A session when she's done. With that said, Ann, welcome to CGSR, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Asmaret. Hi, everyone. I can't see you, but it's great to be here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you today. I really enjoyed working with Lawrence Livermore while I served both at NSA and at the White House, particularly as we looked at AI threats in the context of cyber, bio, or nuclear, and really leveraging both the AI expertise and the sector-specific or the functional expertise that LLNL has. So it's great to be here with you today. As Asmaret mentioned, I'll start a bit with talking about China. This is a group that is very familiar from the work that you do, from seeing the intelligence that we see, as well as from modeling and simulating some of China's capabilities. You're very familiar with the degree to which China has started integrating cyber and space for that matter, but cyber into its military planning. China really recognizes that our economies, our national security, our personal lives all run on digital infrastructure, and a way to put significant pressure on a given society is by disrupting that cyber or digital infrastructure. For that matter, there's a great deal of intelligence that China can also collect because there's so much digital dust left behind, whether that's our intelligence operations, our defense platforms, or just the key elements of the country's strength, of the country's economy and innovation. So China's really recognized that as our digital lives move online, the national security impact of disrupting our digital infrastructure is significant. And that starts, of course, with our military operations, whether we're talking about the connectivity of a carrier strike force, whether we're talking about the potential command of key strategic weapons, or for that matter, whether we're talking about our water, our power, or our pipelines. I know for this group, you're all very familiar with the fact that our military bases ride on the same infrastructure that our homes do. There isn't separate power, water, or oil and gas infrastructure for the U.S. military. It all rides on the same national infrastructure. And for many years, that national infrastructure was not necessarily making the cybersecurity investments needed to ensure that digital infrastructure is as resilient as it needs to be. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But as China has really integrated cyber planning into its military planning, into the way it plans to conduct operations, and frankly, into the way it thinks about putting pressure on a foreign government as part of deterrence. And that can be pressure from the tactical level all the way to the strategic level. At the tactical level, our military deploys from the nation's ports and airports, the same ones that civilians use. And as such, putting pressure by disrupting the operations of key airports, even for a short period of time, could, from a tactical level, delay military mobilizations that could be really important in a period of conflict or crisis, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, a far geographical distance away. At the strategic level, one can see where a Chinese government can quietly message a foreign government, like the US government, like the Japanese, Taiwanese, or South Korean government, that China has control of key digital infrastructure and can disrupt that at will, and use that to coerce or put pressure on that government so that they don't inject or enter a crisis or conflict that's of significant interest to China. So as we think about that environment, as we think about the risks in that space, we can see where cyber is both a key part of US defense, how we ensure that our operations can continue, that America can bridge up power and that we need it, so that our economy can rely on power and water as needed, as well as a way to ensure that it doesn't become a tool of Chinese deterrence. AI is a key part of this because AI makes offensive operations and defensive operations both far easier. I'm very hopeful that AI can actually make a significant difference on the defensive side. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So I wanted to talk about my own background for a moment. I first came into government as a White House fellow, coming in from the private sector where I worked on tech and operations at a financial services company. And I came to government as a White House fellow at the Pentagon for a year and then moved to NSA when the military was standing up Cyber Command. And I served in a small team standing up the command. And then I was asked to really stand up and build an effort called the Enduring Security Framework. And that effort was the first effort to work tightly and strategically with key US digital companies, telecoms, cybersecurity firms. At that point, HP, Dell, AI, and Intel, the key players as part of the server PC OEMs, obviously, and chip manufacturers. And at that point, the effort was to bring together the Department of Defense, DHS, and the intelligence community to work with key companies on hard strategic cyber threats. In that case, this was 2009, that effort led to an effort to focus on a Chinese capability against BIOS. And through that partnership, we surged those companies really developing and then deploying the UEFI standard on BIOS and firmware security. And what that really showed me is that quiet efforts, they were done, quietly in the shadows, certainly wasn't in the US government's interest. We shared classified intelligence with those companies with the goal of getting their partnership and actually deploying cybersecurity protections across their products. And I saw that kind of sensitive, quiet partnership could make dramatic improvements in national cybersecurity. From there, I served as the deputy head of NSA's intelligence operations, and I too saw how much so many of our intelligence efforts really relied on a deep understanding of technology, where vulnerabilities are, and how those are scaled around the world. Following the Snowden media leaks, I was asked to serve as NSA's first chief risk officer. And that highlighted something powerful to me in the context of cybersecurity, which was at NSA, as you know, Snowden was an insider. The threat model and the security model at NSA had not been updated, even as the agency's own intelligence collection operations showed us that hacking was going to be the game-changing intelligence collection method of the future. What do I mean? When I joined NSA in 2009, coming from the Pentagon, I was polygraphed. There were a bunch of security background checks done. And then once I got my badge, I was in. And everybody at that point was really focused. That was as counterterrorism threats were still significant. Everybody very much focused on the culture of teamwork and partnership. And at that point, we were focused on threats from the outside. We built very high walls. We were not focused on insider threats, which frankly, we should have focused on. The best intelligence services in the world were trying to not only hack in from the outside, but we're trying to find insiders. And in every group of people, there are statistically some bad apples. So NSA's security model did not stay updated with the threat. Its picture of the threat didn't stay updated with its own collection successes. And that's a powerful message for us in the national security community to keep in mind, to always stay on our toes, to always be looking at our offensive operations and say, what are we learning about the way we hack into the best defense intelligence services around the world? What does that tell us about how we are vulnerable? So I was asked to serve as NSA's first chief risk officer and build an enterprise risk model to really integrate across partner, operations, and frankly, reputational risk. Because what that also highlighted was to show that as an intelligence agency in a democracy, our responsibility was ensure the average American on the street trusted the intelligence community, trusted the National Security Agency. And people don't trust the black box. They don't trust something they don't understand and they don't know. And it was really on us to retain that trust. And that was certainly something that the Snowden incident also showed. So as part of building an enterprise risk management approach at NSA, I focused significantly on integrating across those different levels and to say, as an agency that's responsible, as an intelligence community, as a national security environment, is responsible for keeping the nation and our allies and partners safe, we must take risk. Risk management does not mean not taking risk. It means assessing risk in a comprehensive way, in a repeatable, predictable way, and then taking risks, making decisions, and if necessary, escalating decisions to ensure the right level is making the decision based on risk. Because as you all know, the steps of risk management are first assessing it, and then aligning decision levels, determining what level needs to make a decision based on how potentially risky a given operation is. Following serving as chief risk officer, I co-led the first offensive cyber operations between NSA and Cyber Command, and then was asked to stand up the Cybersecurity Directorate at NSA. And that was significant because the Cybersecurity Directorate really was intended to bridge a historic problem at NSA. Historically, the information assurance mission that was responsible for the crypto security of nuclear command and control and other sensitive military applications did not have access to top secret intelligence regarding key threats. Some people were ready, but many people view the information assurance mission as a separate mission, and not necessarily that we ourselves had to integrate intelligence regarding adversaries' capabilities, intelligence regarding how we ourselves were successful in collection into the way we secured the highest value assets for the country. So in standing up this organization, we moved over the cyber intelligence mission from the Intelligence Directorate and partnered that with the traditional network defense, cybersecurity advisory, nuclear command and control elements to ensure that, for example, the people building the nation's crypto also had the most sensitive intelligence regarding how Russia and China were trying to hack that, and also how we, if we were having successes, gaining access to other such systems. From there, I moved to the White House on the policy side. And that linkage between technology and policy showed me another key element that I want to highlight to you here. As we think about how we deter China from a policy perspective, we want to closely link in to really what makes Lawrence Livermore so unique from a big ideas lab perspective. Just think about what are the technology big ideas that really enable national deterrence. And that brings me to the thread I talked about at the beginning, which is Chinese compromise and prepositioning in critical infrastructure in the United States and around the world. Just about a year ago, many people first saw the Chinese compromise of telecoms, which the commercial term for that was Salt Typhoon. China turned our nation's telecoms into a second service. They could copy conversations of interest at will, from people serving in the White House to people on the Hill. They could track mobile devices around the country by knowing where cell towers were and tracking certain phone numbers. And they also hacked and gained access to our own lawful intercept systems, the systems the FBI uses to track individuals who are suspected of crimes or who may be of interest as potentially members of a foreign intelligence service, or of interest to us because we're concerned they may be working on behalf of a foreign government. China fundamentally turned numerous telecoms across the US, like I said, to an element of their signals intelligence service. We cannot ever allow that to happen again. So the question for us is, how did that happen? What do we need to do differently to prevent it again? For that matter, China is also pre-positioned. As you may have seen, former Director of FBI Chris Wray's congressional testimony and testimony at an FBI conference in the fall last year, in pipelines, in power, and in water infrastructure, with the goal of disrupting that during a period of crisis or conflict to put pressure on the US government, or as I mentioned earlier, delay military mobilization. Why is that? Why are we there? The first piece is to say that, infrastructure is owned and operated, as you all know well, by the private sector. Cybersecurity was often viewed as an expense, and for many firms, they didn't have access to the intelligence to understand how foreign governments were looking at this infrastructure as a tool of their own deterrence. During the Biden administration, President Biden overturned really decades of bipartisan, both Democratic and Republican, resistance to putting in place minimum cybersecurity standards for critical infrastructure. And President Biden did that because using interpretive rules, using essentially historic security rules to say a railroad, when a railroad was analog or mechanical, we had control, we had security rules for signaling systems. Now that they're digital, clearly the same rules have to be updated for that new era, but we can't simply rely on railroads deciding what cybersecurity they bake into their signaling systems. We want to know that's as secure as needed. So we leveraged existing regulatory authorities by TSA, by the Department of Energy, by EPA to put in place minimum cybersecurity requirements for railroads, for airports, for pipelines, for water entities. And that was really the first beginning of a changer. Because by putting in place a minimum cybersecurity, you at least know what's in place from a basic locking the doors and putting on an alarm system. And it enabled regulators to actually investigate and inspect that, which, as we know, you expect what you inspect. We want entities to go, we want our regulators to develop the expertise to those who know, for example, for a given pipeline. They understand how pipelines operate, and now we leverage cybersecurity expertise there. The second key step is to say, how do we prevent an attack in line? Because locking your doors and windows still doesn't necessarily prevent an intruder from breaking in. You still need a police service. You still need a guard, particularly for assets that matter. And here's where the difference in the model between the United States and China really causes us additional complexity. The United States is a democracy. China is an authoritarian government. The U.S. does not monitor the networks of the U.S. government does not monitor the networks of private sector entities like PG&E, like your local water company, like Colonial Pipeline. China is an authoritarian country. Not only are much of critical infrastructure state-owned enterprises, but the Chinese government, as you all know, has a system of firewalls, the Great Firewall, that monitors communications both for censorship, but also for cybersecurity purposes to defend their networks. So there's a mismatch between the U.S. as a democracy, China as an authoritarian government. Clearly, we want to maintain our civil liberties and privacy. And that is where I think the idea of creating AI-driven digital twins, virtual replicas of critical infrastructure, to actually create those replicas and then model what we know about adversarial operations, about adversarial capabilities, to enable us to find and fix the most significant vulnerabilities. We know there's a large amount of technical debt across U.S. critical infrastructure. We know we can't find and fix every vulnerability purely from an economic perspective. But by modeling those systems, we can test different attack techniques and determine what kinds of attacks, what kind of vulnerabilities could lead China, Russia, Iran, for that matter, to actually disrupt operations for a period of time, or disrupt for more than we can permit, e.g. airport, air traffic command and control. So that's a powerful idea. And it's frankly one of the things that I think Lawrence Livermore has the opportunity to really work on, because you have a good picture of the nation's energy grid. You have the classified intelligence capabilities knowledge regarding different adversaries' planning, different adversaries' offensive cyber programs and offensive cyber capabilities. And imagine building a digital replica of, for example, portions of our energy grid to actually test what we learn regarding adversarial capabilities. We can't do that on a live system. We wouldn't risk it. And this would allow us to actually red team our own systems both in periods of peacetime or conflict, as well as during heightened periods of crisis or conflict where we may want to escalate the level of cybersecurity, the level of readiness, preparation, and resilience in place. And for that matter, this would not only be to find and fix vulnerabilities, it could also be to determine resilience. How long would it take us to recover? What would it take us to recover? And frankly, what's the dependency between different sectors? E.g., if power is disrupted in a given sector, what impact, what kind of resiliency is that for the local airport? What kind of resiliency is there for the local water systems, sanitation, and purification systems? I find this idea so compelling that I want to roll up my own sleeves. I'm a distinguished fellow at Stanford, so I have started working with the San Jose Water Company. I visited it last week and met with the head and their SCADA lead to start thinking about how one could build a digital twin. It was a really fascinating visit as I learned what systems are IP-based and potentially could be replicated, what aren't, and how we would potentially think through that. And I'm happy to talk more about that. So with that, I think to just quickly recap, first, China has certainly started integrating offensive cyber operations into their military planning and into their thoughts on how they could put pressure on the US government, on key allies and partners of ours in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region, from Japan to South Korea to Taiwan, to keep us out of a conflict or crisis, to deter the US from entering that. China's offensive cyber capabilities are also helped by China's authoritarian model that gives them an ability to better defend their own networks, in contrast to the US as a democracy that today does not monitor and defend even the most critical infrastructure networks. We can use AI as a game changer on offense and defense. We can potentially use AI-driven digital twins as virtual replicas of our most critical infrastructure to enable us to model adversaries' offensive cyber capabilities, to find the most significant vulnerabilities and fix them, and also to allow us to potentially elevate our resilience during periods of crisis or conflict. I think LLNL can play a key role in that because of the fact that you're a big ideas lab, because you have expertise in critical infrastructure, expertise in AI, expertise in both offensive and defensive cybersecurity operations. And I look forward to hearing your questions and discussing this further with all of you. Asmara, thank you again for the invitation. It is terrific to be here with such an amazing group of people who spend their time serving their country, spending their time working on big, hard problems. And I look forward to your questions and to engaging with you.